Coming up on our newscast, the government announces the biggest national budget since 2008 global financial crisis, driven by a will to jumpstart the economy. President Park Geunhye prepares for her address at the UN General Assembly. She is expected to touch on issues ranging from peace on the Korean Peninsula and human rights to global terrorism. And Scotland is voting to decide the future of their country's 3-century-old union with the United Kingdom. Well, stay with us for these stories and more.
It's 6 p.m. on Thursday, September 18th here in Korea, live from Seoul. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. The budget plan for next year has been laid out by the Finance Ministry, and the spending is raised by the largest amount since the global financial crisis back in 2008.
Ministry officials say their expansionary policies are essential in pulling the economy out of a low-growth trap. Our economics correspondent Hwang Ji-hye starts us off.
The Korean government on Thursday unveiled its biggest spending increase in 7 years for 2015, underlining its determination to get the nation's economy back on a normal growth track. In its new budget proposal, the Finance Ministry said it will raise spending by 5.7% from this year to 376 trillion won, or roughly $360 billion US dollars.
We raised spending by about $7.5 billion from our original plan. That's a massive rise considering the government's additional spending plans usually hovered around the $5 to $6 billion level in the past.
More than 30% of the 2015 budget will be spent on creating more jobs and improving welfare. It also calls for increasing expenditures in safety-related government projects like an overall inspection of safety facilities. The government aims to prevent large-scale accidents and disasters like April's ferry sinking from happening again. The proposal calls for a $32 billion budget deficit, which would represent 2.1% of the nation's GDP. But the ministry says by breathing fresh life into the sputtering economic recovery, the country would achieve fiscal balance within a few years.
The increased expenditure will result in a virtuous cycle, as it will lead to more income and robust business activities that will, in turn, generate greater tax revenues.
Korea's debt-to-GDP ratio is expected to inch up next year from this year, but the government says it still reflects Korea's relatively sound fiscal health. It says the mid-30% range is still much lower than the OECD average of around 110%. The increased spending plan is projected to help the economy grow by 4% next year. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, another plan laid out this time by the Agriculture Ministry is fueling anger among the country's farmers.
Well, it wasn't long ago that they protested against the government's decision to open up the rice market starting next year.
And today, the government announced it has set the tariff rate for imported rice. Ji Myung-gil has more.
The Korean government has set its tariff on rice imports at 513%. The Agriculture Ministry said the high tariff will help protect Korea's rice industry as imported rice will be more expensive.
We have prepared measures such as stabilizing the income of rice farmers, modernizing the rice farming industry, and promoting the consumption of rice.
Lawmakers from the ruling Century Party also said imposing high tariffs was the only answer to help locally produced rice compete with the influx of imported rice on the market. The move comes as the country is set to liberalize its rice market from next year. However, farmers and civic groups oppose the move, saying it will hurt their livelihoods and the local rice market.
The government unilaterally declared a tariff rate without even discussing it with the farmers or the public. The whole process was done in secret.
The ministry said the proposed tariff rate will be submitted to the World Trade Organization before the end of this month. If the rate is confirmed by the WTO, the proposed tariff will go into effect on January 1st of 2015. However, it could be months until the process is finalized, while the WTO assesses whether the tariff rate proposed by Korea is appropriate. Korea had been allowed to delay the opening of its rice market under a WTO quota agreement in 1993, in exchange for gradually increasing its mandatory import quota, which reached more than 400,000 tons this year. The agreement with the WTO requires Korea to continue importing the mandatory quota even after the market is opened next year at a 5% tariff rate. The government could not afford to further postpone the opening of the rice market, nor had a reason to do so, as the country's rice consumption continues to drop. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
In other news, talks over a possible resumption of the long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's nuclear program are apparently taking place in the United States. The Northeast Asian Cooperation Dialogue, currently underway in San Diego, California, is drawing extra attention because the deputy representatives of South Korea, the U.S., and China for the six-party talks have been meeting on the sidelines. Officials and scholars from all six-party members except North Korea are exchanging their views behind closed doors. The details of their discussions were not released, but reports say they have centered around North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. Now, attention lies in whether the outcome will be able to serve as a major breakthrough in dealing with North Korea's nuclear ambitions.
The country's destiny in the palm of their hands, voting in Scotland has begun in a historic poll that will determine the fate of Scotland's union with the United Kingdom. The latest polls leading up to the election day are too close to call. Our Shin Se-min reports.
For what could be one of the most important decisions of their lives, it comes down to the simplest of choices: yes or no. Polls have opened across Scotland for some 4 million eligible voters who will decide on whether their country serves its 307-year union with the United Kingdom.
Yes, I'm happy with the decisions on that very well. And I'll go all the way. And if we get it tomorrow, I'll be a very happy man.
Definitely no, no, no. Because we're better as a team. A team always works better than an individual.
The latest poll released Wednesday showed a paper-thin lead for the No campaign at 51 to 49%, but it's far too close to call. The survey also showed as many as 600,000 Scots are still undecided about which way they'll vote.
I am still undecided. It's worrying, but it's such a huge decision to make, and we all need to take our vote very, very seriously, so I'm still really don't know what I'm going to do.
If Scotland decides to secede from Great Britain, there are a lot of unknowns. Will the newly independent country still have a future with the European Union? And there'll also be a critical decision to take on its currency. They'll also only have 18 months to arrange all the logistics. But if Scotland chooses to stay within the UK, the relations with the country will most likely be different, as British Prime Minister David Cameron has said London will grant Scotland more powers to govern itself. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed President Barack Obama's plans to help Syrian rebels fight off Islamic State militants. This, as State Secretary John Kerry says, the needed international coalition, is growing. Our Park Ji-hye has this report.
Despite reservations, the U.S. House of Representatives signed off on President Barack Obama's plans to arm and train Syrian rebel forces for their fight against Islamic State militants. The Senate votes next and is widely expected to approve the bill.
I want to start off by saying thank you to House members, Republican and Democrat, who came together today to pass an important component on our strategy for dealing with this terrible terrorist organization.
It's the latest step in the U.S. plan to degrade and destroy the IS militant group. Appearing in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the international community was coming together to counter the threat. He said more than 50 countries have already pledged their support, and that more were expected to follow at the UN General Assembly next week.
I'm confident that with our strategy in place and our international partners by our side, we will have all that we need, and with the help of the Congress, we will be able to succeed in degrading and ultimately destroying this monstrous organization wherever it exists.
The strategy will apparently not include U.S. ground troops, something that President Obama repeated during a visit to the U.S. Central Command on Wednesday.
But I want to be clear. The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. They will support Iraqi forces on the ground as they fight for their own country against these terrorists.
Obama emphasized that the U.S. would maintain a supporting role, saying it's the best way to secure peace in the region amid the brutality of the extremist group. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Thank you, sir.
President Park Geunhye will be making her diplomatic debut at the United Nations next week, addressing the General Assembly for the first time since taking office early last year.
While that speech is expected to center around Seoul's diplomatic efforts to restore peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, President Park will also highlight Korea's role in countering global issues such as climate change and terrorism.
For more, we are now joined in the studio by our presidential office correspondent, Choi Yusun.
Good to have you, Yusun.
Hi. Well, let's first talk about President Park's UN General Assembly address. Well, officials haven't yet finalized the details of that speech. It's widely expected to contain her vision for a unified peninsula and also seek international support behind that plan. Back in March, the South Korean leader proposed that the two Koreas increase Seoul's humanitarian support to Pyongyang and people-to-people exchanges as an initial step towards preparing for reunification. She has even launched a committee here in the South to get ready for the unprecedented process. President Park will also likely talk about rebuilding inter-Korean trust to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue and to bring peace and prosperity to Northeast Asia and Eurasia. It's also possible she might say something about the North's human rights record.
And the UN General Assembly this year is receiving much attention, especially because North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Soo-yong is attending the session. So what can we expect from him?
Well, Lee, who's going to be Pyongyang's highest-ranking official to attend the assembly in 15 years, is likely to defend his country's nuclear and missile development as well as its human rights record. Although no officials from the two Koreas have no plans to meet on the sidelines at the UN, President Park had said the door to engaging with the North is in New York was open. But it's the North's human rights issue that will garner the most attention. For the first time, a ministerial level meeting on the subject will be held on the sidelines of the assembly, where top diplomats from South Korea and the U.S. will speak strongly about the gravity of the abuses taking place inside the regime. This comes after the UN Commission of Inquiry released a report on North Korean human rights earlier this year, and as Pyongyang continues to hold 3 Americans accused of violating North Korean laws. North Korea contests the international community's condemnations, and its foreign minister is expected to rebut the claims in his address to the assembly.
Well, also, the strain between South Korea and Japan is no mystery. Everyone knows about that. And we've heard some report this week that Seoul and Tokyo discuss arranging a first-ever summit between the leaders of these two countries. Is that a possibility?
Right, but the Korea's presidential office has denied the report by a local broadcaster here and added that such an idea was not even under consideration. Citing an unnamed source, the report said the two sides discussed President Park visiting Japan on her return from the UN, but that talks were later called off after Seoul determined that Tokyo's position on historical issues was not satisfactory. Earlier this week, President Park urged the Japanese leadership to make what she called a courageous decision to apologize to the victims of its wartime sex slavery and restore their honor. But there's still a possibility the two leaders could engage in talks at the UN.
And President Park will highlight Korea's contribution to other global issues as well.
Right, addressing the UN Climate Summit next Tuesday, the president will introduce her government's efforts to build a growth engine out of the global problem by converging IT with culture and other sectors in a creative economy, spurring growth and expanding new jobs. At a high-level meeting on global education presided over by the UN Secretary General, President Park will speak about Korea's education system and vow to work to advance education worldwide ahead of next year's World Education Forum here in Korea. At the U.S.-led Security Council meeting on foreign terrorist fighters, a mounting issue of concern, especially in the Middle East, President Park is expected to stress the need for international cooperation to counter the phenomenon of foreigners joining Islamist extremist groups. She will also announce ways that Korea is willing to help in global fight, likely in the form of humanitarian assistance.
And Yusun, you will be traveling with the president next week, so we do have a safe trip, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, thank you.
A one-day entry ban.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Laah Hyun-kyung and Daniel Choy.
Arirang News.
Arirang News. On Early Edition at 6.
Hyundai Motor Group has won a bid to acquire real estate in the affluent district of Gangnam here in Seoul. Hyundai's final offer came in at $10 billion, 3 times the appraised value of the site, and outbid Samsung Electronics. The estate is nearly 80,000 square meters in size and is one of the last remaining large plots of land available for development in the capital. It currently houses the headquarters of the state-run Korea Electric Power Corporation, which is relocating to Jeollanam-do province. Now, Hyundai Motor says it plans to build a global business center on the site, and on today's announcement, shares of Hyundai Motor and its affiliate Kia Motors fell 9% and 10% respectively, while KEPCO's went up 6%. Now, the Park Geunhye administration has been pushing for easing regulations that will help prep up the economy, but Korean enterprises do not appear to be very content with the government's recent deregulation measures. In a survey conducted by the Korea Development Institute on 300 local businesses, the overall reform efforts were given a grade of 2.7 out of 5. The ratings were even lower when assessing the overall communication level with the government and enterprises. About 30% of respondents of those enterprises said there were still too many regulations in the country.
A long string of reports in recent months have pointed to a considerable drop in private consumption here in Korea. Efforts to turn the tide have so far proven unsuccessful, and a new report outlines the reasons why. Our Connie Kim reports.
Increasing household debt and the lackluster youth employment rate are to blame for Korea's sluggish private consumption. That's the diagnosis by the Federation of Korean Industries in a recent report. The shrinking spending capacity of households was pinpointed as the biggest problem limiting consumption. The level of household debt last year stood at nearly $980 billion, which represents more than 70% of the nation's GDP. Now that's up about 20 percentage points from a decade ago. The increase in non-living expenditures such as taxes and insurance is also holding households back from spending. Non-living expenditures grew more than 70% last year from 10 years earlier, with household income increasing far less at less than 60%. Low youth employment was another troubling factor. While more than 400,000 new jobs were created last year, new positions for those in their 20s dropped by 80,000, while those for people in their 50s rose more than 200,000. Rising home rental prices, medical expenses, and difficulties in preparing for life after retirement were also cited in the report as reasons for Korea's sluggish private consumption. Officials at the Federation of Korean Industries say it's important to increase investment, which would generate employment and in turn lead to a boost in consumption. The federation also called for measures that could induce corporate investment. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
As we have covered many times before, Korea has become one of the most visited countries by Chinese tourists. And with China's National Day holiday just around the corner, a record number of visitors are expected to fly across the West Sea. Our Kim Min-ji tells us more.
China's week-long National Day holiday kicks off on October 1st this year. Around 160,000 Chinese tourists are expected to flock to Seoul, up 35% from the same period a year ago. Nearly 8 million foreign tourists visited the country this year as of July, and about 3.4 million, or 4 in every 10 foreign visitors, were Chinese. And it's a trend that's likely to continue. The total number of Chinese visitors is expected to reach 5 million next month and 6 million by the end of the year. Will they open their wallets? Chinese people are much wealthier than they used to be, with their gross national income per capita standing at around $6,700 last year. And they aren't shy about spending while they're here either.
Chinese tourists tend to spend more during special occasions. In the case of the national holiday, they're expected to shell out nearly $3,000 each.
It's estimated that Chinese tourists will spend over $400 million during the holiday week alone. But the increased spending doesn't necessarily go into the pockets of Korea.
Many visitors arrange their visits through Chinese travel agencies or dwell in Chinese-operated hotels, so a significant portion of the profits actually go back to China.
He added that to prevent such a phenomenon, Korea needs to develop its tourism infrastructure, for instance by providing more language assistance and making it more convenient for Chinese tourists while they are here. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Well, tomorrow is the day, the 17 Asian Games hosted by Korea's western port city of Incheon, right? It will hold its grand opening ceremony.
Korea's history with the sporting event dates back 60 years, and Team Korea has proven itself as a fierce competitor over that time.
Right. From New Delhi to Incheon, our Kwon So-ah has more.
Asia's biggest sporting event, the Asian Games, finally gets started on Friday in Korea's northwestern port city of Incheon. The history of the Asian Games dates back to 1951, when it was first hosted in New Delhi. 35 years later, the event came to South Korea for the first time when it was hosted by Seoul, followed by Busan in 2002. Incheon now becomes the third Korean city to have the honors. South Korea first participated in the Asian Games in 1954 in Manila, when it placed third in the overall medal count and has sent athletes to every event since. In 1970, in Bangkok, Korean swimmer Cho Ho-ryun began his rise to legendary status, winning gold in the 400 and 1500-meter freestyles. At the 8th Games in Bangkok, Korea's Kim Jin-ho won gold in archery, while Yang Jung-mo came out on top in wrestling. In 1981, Korea started preparing to host the 10th Asian Games in Seoul. Stadiums, accommodations, and new roads were built leading up to the event in 1986.
30억 아시아인이 공동의 번영과 우위를 약속하면서 아시아의 영원한 전진을 다짐한 아시아인의 축제가 열린 것입니다.
Team Korea thrived that year, breaking various world records and finishing second overall. Korea showed its superiority in male and female hockey, defeated China in table tennis, and swept up medals in all 12 weight classes of boxing.
성화가 꺼졌습니다. 우리는 해냈습니다.
Korea has grown into a powerful sports nation throughout the years and aims to prove it once again at the 2014 Incheon Asian Games, where the goal is to win at least 90 gold medals. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now the weather, unlike yesterday, it was a bright sunny day here in the capital.
Will this nice weather continue into the weekend is the question in our minds. And for an answer, let's turn to our weathercaster, Michelle Park. Michelle.
Good evening, guys. It was definitely a nice day here in Seoul and with pleasant temperatures, of course. However, those are going to drop into the teens overnight. But we'll have an even more pleasant day tomorrow with fewer clouds and slightly warmer temperatures than today. However, Jeju Island can expect another round of rain tomorrow evening, and the weekend looks like it'll hold more of the same. Now, as for the opening ceremony of Incheon Asian Games for tomorrow at 6 p.m. Korea time, the skies will be clear. Highs in the days in the port city will rise up to 26, and the evenings will be only slightly cooler. Now going over to our tomorrow's readings, Seoul will start off the Friday morning at 16 before reaching up to 29 degrees in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will see the highs of 28 and 26 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island is wet and cool at 24, while Dokdo drops down to 23, while Mangeungang is slightly higher at 24. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that's all we have for you at this hour. Thank you for staying with us. To our viewers in different time zones, have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. For those tuning in from Korea, have a great rest of the evening. Daniel and I will be back same time tomorrow.